I hope this thing. I'm doing this StreamYard for free, and I don't know how many. I don't know how much it'll hold recording. I know I need to just go ahead and buy like a subscription to it, but
Right.
it is what it is. So it balances the volume and everything out, and it records it, and I can just transfer the file. But what I want to do is try to put some of these interviews on YouTube.
Uh-huh.
That way, people, because it seems like people want to go and watch that stuff more so than not.
Yeah. And maybe that's a thing like where if they have more service or something like that, because I think a lot of guys out west, they download stuff to listen to it because you have
Hmm.
so many places you don't have cell service, and
Oh,
just
so they're
listen while they're driving.
downloading they're downloading the YouTube.
They'll download the YouTube video, but they're just listening to the audio because the video doesn't play, and they'll just listen to the audio while they're driving around.
Oh, nice, nice. All right. So today, Wednesday, we are going to be talking to Travis Legler, and I'm going to let him explain what he does because he travels all over the place. But it's interesting that we're going to have this conversation because I just got off the phone with another officer that runs hounds, and we're having the same conversation. So this is definitely piquing some interest in the hound and law enforcement crossover. And Travis and I had a conversation a week or two ago about the difference in dogs, and we'll get into that in a little bit. It's going to be pretty interesting for me especially. But you hound guys, you're going to find out how fortunate you are that you don't have a lead attached to that dog because it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, Travis, give us a lowdown. What you got?
Uh, well, my name's Travis Legler. I've been in law enforcement for 24 years now, and I've worked a variety of different. I've worked for 3 different agencies. Um, Currently work for a land management agency, and we focus on resource protection and things like that. Prior to that, I worked for Border Patrol, and I run hounds for lion and sometimes bear out here on the west side of the Rockies, based out of southern Utah.
Yeah. So you've been going back and forth to the border doing some tracking, haven't you?
Yes, sir. We go down and support Border Patrol operations as an agency, and we go down and tie in with those guys and partner up with them and go down and help and do apprehension work and tracking and disrupting the flow and targeting the mules and the drug runners.
So let me ask you because I've said this on the podcast several times. My like I love running bear. There's nothing more exhilarating to me. It's it's awesome, and I can't imagine myself not doing it. But when you catch a human that's trying to avoid you, that has the same mental capacity that you have, it's hard to top that.
It is, and it can, and it plays in. Most of us, I think, probably when we're running our hounds, we're hunting during daylight hours, and of
Hmm.
course, a lot of stuff that we do is after dark, or in the wee hours of the morning or the waning light of the day.
So, are y'all running nods?
Yeah,
Yep.
yep. Night vision.
Quads or duels?
So we a lot of stuff is on foot, but we'll do some UTVs and things like that have
Hmm.
blackout capability to work our way in closer
Hmm.
to a group, and then take off on foot from there.
So, yeah, are you running dual tubes, quads, monots? Which ones are you
So
running?
mine's a dual single, so it's got
Hmm.
both eyes, and then it combines down into a single, and then
Uh-huh.
most of our thermals are just a single
Single.
monocular.
Yep. Yeah, it's funny that you say that because we just got through teaching our tracking class last week, and the last day of our training is we run evening into the nighttime, and we give the teams resources. We give them the drone resource, which is phenomenal. Most of your TAC guys that's in the class, they're running nods. Most agencies are getting up to speed with that, which are getting some pretty nice the white phosphorus nods. And I when I teach the class, I mean, I always say this. I always say that tracking in nighttime is like a two-edged sword. It is your best opportunity to surprise the suspect, And at the same time, if you're not equipped to run blacked out, it is the worst time to track because you have lights, too
Yep.
much stuff going on, and it's so dangerous. So it's like if you can run blacked out, then
Yeah.
it's a lot safer. The element
Well,
of surprise, right?
and that white phosphorus was a game changer. When the first night vision that I ever got issued was the old green stuff, and the depth
Yeah.
perception and things like that just was terrible. And white phosphorus is just a game changer. I mean, the depth perception's there, so you're not tripping over every little thing that you walk
Mhm.
across, and you can literally just walk right in on people, and you can see them making motions with their hands and their face and trying to listen for you and things like that. And you walk right up onto them, and then hit the old switch on the side of the helmet that shines white light, and their eyes are like a deer in the headlight, just wide eye, and most of them don't even know what to do because you're so close to them at that point they don't really have a choice to run.
They don't have time to think. The first time we had a company come in and they brought us the dual tubes, and the IR lights
Uh-huh.
to put on the end of the rifle. So what we done with that training session is we would put somebody in the wood line, and we would bring the team up, and we would just run a linear, just a straight line, and we would just, okay, when you pick them out with the nods, shine your light. And then we actually started using the FLIR
Mm-hmm.
to show the thermal. We started using it some, but man, when you shine that thermal, when you shine that uh, IR on them, like
Yeah.
you can't. I mean, it's there, and they have no clue. And
Yeah.
our track layer, like we surrounded him, like literally surrounded him, and he was hidden pretty good.
Uh-huh.
And we literally, like you said, we were standing 2 foot away, and everybody lit him up. And I swear, he said he about peed his pants.
Yeah.
He said it was that intimidating. He was like, "Holy
Yeah.
cow!" Like, I didn't even hear y'all coming.
Right. Well, and they make some pretty fancy IR stuff nowadays. We all run an IR white. It's a dual light on our helmets. We've also got the IR handheld lights as well. So, if you need to get down and look at the ground, or if you got real thick brush or something, you can really throw some light into that brush and see a lot better than, just looking through the nods on a dark night.
Yeah, and I actually run on my headlamp. I've got an hour strobe. So
Uh-huh.
if we have aviation up,
Yeah.
which we don't do often, but if we have aviation up, they can pick us up, and then we've got a strobe that we can put on the dog's vest too. Do y'all use that?
So we run a strobe on every person that's out there, including the canines, so
Mhm.
that they're readily identifiable by with not only us that are on the ground, but like when we're working with border patrol and stuff. A lot of times they have a scope truck up, on a hill
Mhm.
somewhere, and they're out watching, and so then they can quickly identify, agent versus suspect, and say,
Right.
hey, agent on the right, wave your hand or something like that, and just to confirm that it's you or whatever, and then move in on what they're seeing in their scope.
Yeah. I mean, that's all the cool stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, it's all cool stuff. You know, of course, I'm a little jealous. If I had 24 years in, I'd be counting my days. Like, it would be into the days that I could bug out, but, I'm not there yet. I'm in 21, so I got 4 years left, but,
Yeah.
we do it, I sometimes I take for granted that I've got the best job in the world, like, out teaching last week, we've got canines come in from some different agencies, and we're taking these teams and showing them how we operate with the dog and how to
Yeah.
do that. And like I could literally do that every day of my life because I
Oh,
love
yeah.
it.
Yeah, it's a blast.
It's not working for me.
No, no, it's a lot of fun. We teach
Yeah.
the local sheriff's office here in the county I live in. They teach a tactical tracking class every year that I've been fortunate enough to go to every year and help teach that class. And so they don't
Mm,
implement the canine into it, but they bring officers from mostly the West. But a couple years ago, we did get a couple officers out in Maine and further away coming through this tracking class. It's a 4-day class. We're all
mhm.
camped out in the hills, and it's just all tracking all day, every day, and then a big scenario on the last day where they actually go in and do a mock fugitive apprehension.
And that's all visual.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, cool. I got to get in that. Gonna.
It's all on the ground. It's you start out with baby steps. You start out day one. We kind of we show a video. The county shows a video on why they do it. You know, they had an officer that was slain in the line of duty back in 2010. They were teaching this class even before that, but it took a new meaning on for them. You know, they took a new purpose for them. And so they bring in, you know, an officer that has been involved in an officer involved shooting and had to track a suspect. They bring them in to talk and say how critical it is for tracking and things.
Mm.
And then we start out with, you know, the spore pit. And, you know,
Yep.
there's one PowerPoint. There's like an hour-long PowerPoint on identifying sign and, you know, and going through the different terminology, spore and, you know, tactical movements with your team and things like that. We go to the spore pit. Then we go to the micro tracking, and then we start laying tracks, and we break up into teams and instructors. We usually have 2 to 3 instructors for every six to 8 students, and we just take a group and we head out into the open country or we chase our rabbit. You know, the rabbit lays multiple trails. They may hide up in a tree. They may hide under a rock. They may try to backtrack, double back on you, get behind you to test the strength of your team that's tracking, you know, your flankers and your rear guard and things like that. So it's a really good class. It's been very fortunate to be able to implement into that, and the county welcomes me every year to come help teach.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So let's get into why we had a conversation, and it all comes back to tracking.
Yep.
So lay it out there, and then we're just going to work through it again.
All right. So I originally reached out to both. I reached out to Chris first, and he said you'd be the better one to talk to. So I reached out to you, and you know, my question is I work a lot with canines from, you know, several different agencies and, you know, dual purpose tracking, drug detection, whatever the case may be. And it always has baffled me why those, you know, German Shepherds or Malinois, and I just use Shepherd as a general term, but it could be a Shepherd or a Malinois, give out so fast, you know, when they're in those situations, you know, and that's what kind of prompted our conversation and me reaching out to you is just figuring out why, you know, our hounds will run for, you know, out here in the West, you know, you can trail a lion for 18 miles and not ever catch up to it. And the dogs are ready to do it again the next day. And, you know, you might trail an illegal down along the border with one of the canines. And after 30 minutes, 45 minutes, the dog is smoked. And then you're just doing it by, you know, sight and doing it on, you know, the old school way. So that's the original reason I reached out to you about it, to kind of discuss the differences between the hounds and the law enforcement canines.
And you know, I think about that a lot, and I've told my group this, and I'm probably repeating something I've said on a prior podcast, but I feel like we don't get half of the capabilities out of our police dogs. One, because very few people actually know what they're capable of.
Right.
Like you and I, we see our dogs running across mountain ranges and from daylight till dark and having to cut them off. And we see that, and we see our dogs on top of the rig and driving down an old mountain road, and they open up and they go 400 or 500 yards in up a ridge or down a hollow or valley or canyon, wherever you're at. And then they open, and then they take that track or they start running that animal. You know, we see those things. And my typical handler, they don't have any. They may own pets.
Mm-hmm.
None of my handlers right now are dog hunters in any form and fashion. Bird
Right.
dogs, beagles, hounds. I don't care what it is. None of them are hunters, retrievers.
Mm-hmm.
None of them. So them seeing what you and I see is two different worlds. And when I say, nah, we can do better, and they're looking at me like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, no, the dog's got a way more capabilities than this. But
Right.
So I think that's one thing, is that we get to see different worlds for one. And when you talk about the difference, but I told you the first thing, and when you asked me that question, I'm like, I see it because my dog gasses. I can get about a mile out of him. That's
Mm-hmm.
about my limit. If it, again, let's just put that in a bowl, because
Mm-hmm.
it could be hot. If it's hotter, I may get less, and if it's cooler and the conditions are right, I may get more. It depends on the terrain. Like, are we climbing up ridges and down hills, and him pulling me up and down them? So, we'll just use that as a number, a mile. And my thought process is the biggest difference is that lead being attached to the dog, and then me, 260 pounds,
Mhm.
holding that dog back. Like for my end, I'm trying to slow my dog down so my team can keep up with me and that I'm not
Right.
out front with nobody. But then when you told
Yeah.
me your version of it, I'm like, okay, well, there's something else to it other than the lead.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, because when you had mentioned that, I agreed 100%. If you're holding your dog back, you're obviously the dog's expending way more energy, trying to pull against you and track at the same time. And then, I described to you a scenario where recently I was backing a canine handler from the Border Patrol, and they have a lead attached to them. It's a 20-foot leather lead, but they go as fast as the dog goes. And the person that's backing that handler has to go as fast as the handler goes. So they're not holding that dog back, and the dog's going off air scent. And so you may be at a slow run running through the brush and the cactus, keeping up with that handler and that dog.
yeah, I mean, and that amazes. I mean, again, and then we talked about it. I mean, typically the guys that you're tracking are unarmed. Typically,
Nowadays, yes. 6 years ago, no.
it was probably more the cartel, the mule type thing, right?
Well, 6 years ago, it was a lot more of the green dope being backpacked across, and they had a protection element with them because
Mhm.
of bandits that were robbing the dope off of the mules. And
Uh-huh.
so they would have an armed, basically a guard with their drug load. And they didn't really have an arm to target law enforcement. They didn't want to get into shooting with law enforcement. They would always ditch the gun and ditch the bullets because it's a higher sentence if they get caught with it. But they would have those things with them. And if you're creeping through the night, they don't know who you are until you make contact.
So what happened? What happened if you did run up on them at that point, like with
Once
the
you
dog?
once you identified, so Border Patrol they only have very few dual purpose canines. So only their specialty teams use, like, the full on bite dogs. The
Mhm,
majority of the line agents that are canine handlers have tracking and detection only. So their dogs aren't, they're not the spun up, they have Malinois and stuff, but they're not
mhm,
the ones that are so wound up want to bite something. And some of the handlers are, they're very good. They know that dog has a propensity to bite. And so they
mhm.
may track, we've got a canine handler with us that if he's using his dog to track a non-bite apprehension type of a scenario, he lets that dog run with its toy in its mouth because he knows that the dog's not going to let go of that toy, just to avoid any chance of that dog, biting somebody when it's not supposed to.
So so the apprehension dog is running with a toy in his mouth so he doesn't apprehend.
Like your rubber, whatever
Mhm.
you use as
The
the reward.
Kong or yeah.
Yeah, whatever you're using as your reward. So his particular reward is a rubber wrapped piece of PVC, and
Mhm,
that dog when he's tracking, because he is a patrol dog. He usually patrols when he's tracking like that kind of thing. He uses that toy in its mouth while he's tracking, just so he doesn't run the risk of biting
but it's
biting when he's not supposed to.
how does that
Because
affect
again, we're going at a fast speed. We're not holding the dog back right there in front of us. The dog, we're in thick brush, and that dog might be 10, 15 feet ahead of you and come around a corner and run right into that group before you even have a chance to be there to give a command.
so how does that affect the dog's scenting behavior? Like
And
I know I can run um like Randy Hare does the on target or
mhm.
on target method. And Randy, if a dog don't want to out the toy, Randy won't fight with him. He just says, "Okay, go ahead and run the car again." When the dog gets an odor, poop, he spits it out, does his
Mhm.
thing. So how does that work?
So in this particular instance, this canine handler is a houndsman as well. And I think
Mm,
he has such a good read on his dog that when he puts a muzzle on this dog, the dog gasses out really fast because it's fighting the muzzle. So if he allows it to run with that toy in its mouth and trail, that dog will go for miles trailing with no issues because it's happy. It's
wow,
in its mouth. But you put a
that's
muzzle on
crazy.
that same dog, and it can't go a half mile because he's so wound up with that muzzle on his mouth because he thinks he's going to bite something.
Uh huh. Yeah, I mean, I see it, I can understand it, but that's a long. I mean, that dog's trying to breathe, and everything else with that toy in his mouth. That's interesting. I mean, that's interesting. Like,
It is, but and you're tracking, pretty fresh scent. It's not like you're, running day old scent. It's pretty fresh. It's air scent. They're getting in the scent cone and they're pushing through the brush and it's not like they're like we do where we're trailing, something that's night old or whatnot.
and I don't remember if this was mine in your conversation or mine and somebody else's. And I was down at the APA breed days here recently, so it may have come from down there. But we were talking about roading dogs,
Uh-huh.
and this is going to kind of play into what you and I were talking about. So I don't know who I was having this conversation with, but we were talking about somebody was asking me about a treadmill and asked me if I run my police dogs or my hounds on treadmills. And I told them that I have in the past,
Hmm.
but I found that it was not very effective. And the
Right.
reason why, and if you go get on a treadmill right now and you start running a mile every day for 2 weeks, then
Hmm.
go outside and run a mile.
It's
Like,
not the
it's
same.
different. Oh no, it's different. And I told them that, if I just want to keep my dogs, moving and keep them active and literally it does limber up the muscles and stuff, and
Hmm.
they don't get as stiff and stuff as quick. Has worked well for me.
Yeah.
But for me to get a dog in shape on a treadmill has not been very effective.
Hmm.
Now, then we went to the conversation about roading dogs, and I told them that I have roaded dogs, and they were talking about hunting off a horseback,
Uh-huh.
that they felt like they could ride 25 miles on horseback with their dogs, and their dogs could do it every day.
Uh-huh.
And but when you get to running an animal,
Right.
it changes the intensity level. It changes everything about what that hound is doing.
Oh yeah. There's
So
nothing like being in hunting shape than hunting.
that's right. I mean, yeah, and it takes my dogs a good 2 weeks
Hmm.
of, and I mean, I've got to give them a break a day or two in there too, because if you're running them hard, but it takes me a good 2 weeks to get my dogs in good running shape. But then let's talk about the guys running for the nationals in the coyote world. They told me that it takes them 4 months
Hmm.
to get their dogs in where they can run for a 3-day weekend.
Oh yeah.
4 months, and they're running them dogs like 13, 20 miles daily.
Well, if you
And I'm
think
like,
about it, in a coyote race, they're at an all-out sprint the entire race.
mhm,
Even with bears, they'll stop and bay the dogs, and the dogs get a break. With lions, we're trailing the overnight scent, and then once they're jumped, most of the time after they're jumped, it's not a long race, so they're not really sprinting. Like in what I assume the coyote world. I've never hunted, coyotes with dogs, but from the videos and stuff I've seen, them dogs are flat moving the entire time. It's like
yes.
comparing, a sprinter to a marathon runner. It's a different conditioning.
Yeah, it's like when at football, in high school, I come out of football season and I think, man, I'm in shape. I've been working this. We've been 2 days in July and we've been doing this until the end of December. And the first day of wrestling practice, the coach would make us all throw up. Like,
Yeah.
oh my Lord. Like those 10-yard sprints in football and occasionally that 50-yard sprint is nothing like, you know, having to wrestle somebody for 3 minutes at a time that's
Just
fighting your strength.
getting in the shape that you're going to be doing. I knew I took a guy hunting that, I mean, he was phenomenal shape. He was an officer, he rode bikes and lifted weights and hot and ran and did all these things all the time. He just told me how fast he was just going to run up the mountain and everything else. Once we
You
got into
broke
that
him.
fall and all that loose rock and everything else, he wasn't such in shape as he thought he was.
You broke him, didn't you?
I said,
It, cha-
slow and
it
steady
changed.
wins the
It
race.
changed his. It changed his thought process, didn't it?
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. I told him, I said, I don't ever run. I just hike after these hounds. And he's like, oh, I'll be able to keep up with the dogs. I was like, yeah, good luck, buddy.
It's funny you say that. Last year we were hunting, and uh, Chelsea, she works out every day. She does
Hmm.
some plyo, CrossFit, something every day, and she's on me. She's like, "You need to get off the couch, and you need to do this." And it was the January 3rd last year. We got after a bear, and before my day was over with, we left the truck at 7 that morning, and we didn't get back. I didn't get back to the truck until 9 something at night. And I covered 14 some point miles. I don't know. Well, about 9 miles into that, I lost her.
Yeah.
And so she ended up going to the truck, coming around to pick me up, you know, after it was all said and done. And I said, yeah, I said, how's those workouts working for you? I said, it's different when you're trucking through the mountains than it is doing that.
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure.
But yeah, so back to the dogs. Like it does intrigue me that you guys are running completely different than ours. I know for a fact that us holding our dogs back is a big part of why we are gassing our dogs at that, you know, in that mile range.
Right.
Now we have a Hanoverian hound, a Hano, and now he tracks very slow, very methodically. Like, you know, he just kind of works his way through. Now he can keep tracking on and on, but there is no lead pressure really. Like you just walk behind him basically, and you're moving at the same pace he is.
Yeah.
So he's definitely got a lot more. He's got a lot more duration to him,
right,
than my dog. My dog, if I could show, you know, paint you a picture of his profile, and for the guys listening, his profile is when he is in tracking mode for me to read to say he is actually in odor. He looks like a sled dog. I mean, his butt's down, his head's below his shoulders. I mean, you can see his shoulder blades working, like when he's coming up out of those strides. Like that's what he looks like.
Yeah,
when he's tracking,
he's pulling you.
And another thing too, Travis, that I've thought about, and I may not quote this exactly right, but they say for every 15 minutes of nose work, and I use this for my detection dogs, but what you're telling me, I think it could be implemented with what we're talking about. For every 15 minutes of nose work is like that dog completed a mile. So if you're tracking a mile with your dogs, our dogs, then it's like they're tracking 5 because they're getting 15, 15, 15. That's 4 miles, and then they're doing a mile on top of that. So they're technically, in theory, and again, I'm speaking theoretically,
right,
that they could be putting 5 miles into our one.
Right.
So that may have some influence on what's going on in the tracking world.
That could, and I could see that, especially on the leash side, but that same correlation would be true of the hound. If they're tracking for every 15 minutes, they're going that extra mile and everything else. So the correlation of the amount of time they're tracking and the distance they've traveled would be essentially the same without outside influence, like the leash that's pulling back on that dog and things like that.
Well, and let's go right back to the conversation we just had about the treadmill and the roading. Is it a playing into effect that our dogs aren't conditioned the same?
I would agree that they're not conditioned the same. If you take a normal police dog that spends its 9 to 5 in a car, getting out, occasionally walking around a car sniffing, occasionally, maybe getting out and tracking somebody, a kid that left its house or whatever like that, short distance and stuff. And then, with my agency now, we get sent all over the Western US. They take that canine from, say, Wyoming, South Dakota, wherever, send it down to Southern Arizona along the border. Completely different terrain, completely different scenario. Now you're expecting that dog to get out and track for miles and hours on end. That definitely would play into the conditioning of that dog, because it's not conditioned to that kind of environment and that kind of a scenario.
Well, and that's going to lead me to another thought that I had a Mally before my little Dutchie I got now. I had a Mally before him. And if I carried him in my car for 12 hours, the dog never shut down. He was in there. He was burning so much energy during the day. If I got a call at 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening, I knew that I was good for about 400 or 500 yards, and he's gassed.
Right.
Because he never shut himself down in a car. He just bam, 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 bam. I mean, right on acid. Like,
It's similar
stop.
to like your rig dogs. Look how much worn out your rig dogs are from balancing up there on that platform, during the day.
Mhm.
You run them all day long up there on the platform, they're tired. Well, if your police dog's doing the same thing in the back seat, constantly moving on his legs and stuff, he's consuming a ton of energy.
Yep. So would that play into some effect? I don't know how the dogs you're with are acting, but my dog now, like, and that was one of the criterias when I went to pick because I knew this was going to be my last dog. Me and him's going to retire together. He's going to lay on the couch, and I'm going hunting and fishing. But but one of the criterias when I got this particular dog was he didn't bark in the car.
Mhm.
I can't stand that, and I got him at 11 months old too, so I got him a lot younger than the Mally, which I got at 16 months old. But
Uh,
I wanted a quiet dog, and I wanted a dog that did not pace the whole time. I didn't want that nervous energy. I didn't want that nervous energy. I wanted a dog that laid down,
mhm.
nothing out of him, and when you opened that door and cracked the lead on him, he's ready to go to work.
Yeah. And I can't say 100% for all the dogs that I've been around and worked with, but I know a couple of the dogs fit that same bill. They're
Mhm,
just relaxed in the truck. When you open the door, if you're letting them out to go to the bathroom, they just kind of haphazardly jump out. They're not like the hounds that bail out and go running all over the place looking for something to pee on or whatever, but they just kind of get out. They know the drill. They've been conditioned to, okay, it's time to work. It's time to get out and blow out,
mhm,
or whatever. And so they don't bark in the vehicle. They're pretty mellow. The one dog actually, a couple years ago, we actually were training the dog to be deployed from a TV, and so the
mhm,
handler was in front seat. The dog was between us, and for the first probably 30 minutes, we put a muzzle on the dog just because we weren't sure how the dog would react, and neither one of us wanted to get bit because I'm
mhm,
driving and it's nighttime, it's dark, so there's a lot of new things, a lot of moving parts, and so we put the dog between us on the floor. Once he figured it out after about 30 minutes, he just laid on the floor until we stopped or opened the doors or something like that. He was content just laying on the floor and being mellow. And he's a Malinois, so not very characteristic of a
mhm.
Malinois, but he
Was
figured it out.
patrolled apprehension or just tracking?
He was apprehension. He's full
Yeah,
service. Yeah.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
but he's just a good dog, and probably a good handler as well. That handler's a really good handler.
And, something else, I mean, just sitting here thinking about you're changing, I don't know if people's picking up on this, but you're changing environments. Okay, so you went from doing whatever was normal to him. Now you got him on a UTV. Now you got him in between two people. Um, I know that stress, and I'm not saying for him, but you brought up a good point. Stress plays a big factor in that too.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like, when the air dogs get stressed, um, a lot of times they'll just shut down.
Yeah.
And maybe not even be out of shape. Just I'm done for right now. So, which I'm assuming that if those are border patrol dogs, they are very well acclimated to the
Well,
things that they need to do.
and that would be have to where we'd have to kind of separate the two different dogs. So you've got like our agency that the dogs are coming from everywhere, and the border patrol dogs that are they're stationed down there, so they're used to it. They do it day in and day out. That's their whole job. But
Hmm.
when I talk to some of those handlers asking about the longevity and the endurance, they'll be like, my dog's got four in him, and then I got to give him, a 2 hour break or whatever before I can go track another group. He's got four tracks in him before I can go track another group. And they don't divide it up by miles because you just never know how far you're going to be tracking. But they know their dog well enough to say, we can deploy 4 times, and then I've got to take my dog, and he's got to chill out for a while, take a nap, whatever he's going to do. But it's with a hound, it's like, okay, so where's the comparison? How do you compare that? Because the way they run their dogs down there, they're not holding tight to that leash. They may slow them down, like when we get to these really nasty cactus patches, the cholla, so they're not getting drugged through the cholla, and trying to follow the dog because the dog can go through it and we can't
Hmm.
quite as easy. But most of the time, that lead's pretty loose. It's just dragging, and it's kind of running through their hand back and forth as they're following the dog. So, where's the correlation between the hound that's running completely unrestricted in that same environment and that dog that's conditioned to it, that's not really being held back? Why is there that breakdown, in the endurance on that? That's kind of what I've always kind of geeked out on, trying to figure out, why is this dog not have the same endurance as, a hound, for instance?
Yeah, and sitting here just, kind of wheels are turning. Our hounds are not superior to the working dog as much
No.
as I would like to say they are. I would say they're equal.
Uh-huh.
Like our working dogs, our, the dog, most of the dogs that I'm fooling with, and you said it, their drives are over the top.
Yeah.
Like, they will literally work until they pass out. And you talk about
Uh-huh.
tracking. Um, I was on a track, well, it's more, I don't know, maybe it was back in August or September. It was humid, it was hot.
Hmm.
Um, it was in the evening. Humidity was really high here, and the guy took off running, and one of my perimeter units seen him coming up a creek. So I drove around to where he had seen him. We put on the track, and this ridge was straight up and down. It was like climbing a horse's face, I'll say. And we took off, and we got up around some ledges, and Pino was just like flat out. He was pulling me up the mountain, like honestly, like he was just. He was dug in and gone. We got around this a little outcrop, and he took a left hand turn. He was still parallel. He was still going at a 45 up this steep ridge, and when he got up another rock outcrop, he turned and started parallel. And I said, "Oh, we got him now. Like he's
Hmm.
gassed. He's trying to." Well, then we got around the ridge about 40 or 50 yards, and he turned and was going straight back down to the creek. Well, by the time we got about halfway down the ridge, um, the perimeter units hollered out. I could hear him. They'd make he'd run right up in the perimeter unit
Oh, okay.
in the creek, so they caught him. But what I was going to say is, when I got stopped and got Pino stopped and I took the lead off the harness and put it back onto his collar, he was falling over.
Yeah.
Like he was literally like, gassing and falling over.
Okay.
So I got him back down to the creek and let him get some water and got him up into the car, turned the air conditioning on. But it scared me
Hmm.
because he was on the brink of that heat exhaustion,
Yeah.
but he was pulling me like I knew I was right there because he was pulling me so hard. Like I couldn't hold him back, and we were going straight up, like
Yeah.
straight up.
Hmm.
So that was a very short track. I'm going to say it was probably less than 500 yards total.
Okay.
But it felt like 2 miles,
Yeah.
like going the way we did and up, down
Yeah.
across the creek and up the ridge. So um, that was his limit for sure. But I played a lot of that into the humidity.
Yeah.
So, but anyway,
I see that in towns, the humidity, it affects them because we're not humid out here. And if we get a humid day, like we get these monsoon storms that come in the summer, and you
mhm,
try to go out and run, the hounds don't last as long in the humid. I don't last as long in the humidity.
that's right. Yeah. But I don't have a very good answer. I've got a lot of theories like we've talked,
Right.
but I don't have a go-to. Yes, this is a difference. I see the same thing you see. I see, our dogs are good for a mile, mile and a half. The Hano could probably go 4 or 5.
Yeah.
But if we have a perimeter set up, you're not going that far.
Yeah.
You're never gonna. You're very seldom do we need to even go a mile. Usually within that 1,000 yard, half a mile range, you're caught.
Yeah.
And again, we're putting a lot of back pressure on our dogs, trying to slow them down,
Hmm.
which is completely opposite. But even running our dogs in two different styles, we're getting the same result.
Right. Yeah.
So it's got to be something. Like it's got to be something that we're both doing.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see like more of a standard, like the way you guys run your tracking dogs, if you would catch up to those groups. Because typically, what happens, like especially during the day, when you're tracking a group of illegals, they hear you coming, they get up and they run. I mean,
You
they flat out run, and then they'll bust up like a covey of quail, and so you'll have people going every direction. And usually, the canine handler we'll find the one that's hiding in the brush or something, and the rest of us are chasing, just visual sight chasing out through the mountains and the rocks and the hills and stuff. And so it'd be interesting with holding back the dog and moving the track at a slower pace, because a lot of times we don't know how far we are behind them, if they've made it, because we got to catch them before they get to where their loadout spot is, before they get to the highway or wherever their predetermined location is, or wherever their, radio or their phone is telling them to go. We have to catch them before they get there. They load out and it's game over. It sucks to track them all the way up to a road and be like, oh, they loaded out. I just wasted 3 hours tracking this group and they already loaded out.
Well, I would say without a perimeter, that would affect our tracking time. Like we would be further behind because we're not running like you guys. But I do know the last couple of training days that we've had, I've been doing a lot of off lead. Every one of our dogs is running off lead. And the purpose of me doing that is to show my guys how fast that dog can get to the end game. So we did, and again, I know everybody's gonna laugh, but we laid an hour old tracks because I've got too many people. I can't do 8, 6, 10 hour tracks. I can't do it.
Right.
So we laid an hour old track, put the dog on the beginning of the track, and we cut them loose. And those dogs, half mile tracks, half mile, which is 1,000 yards.
Yeah.
Those half mile tracks, the dogs were finding them in 2 to 4 minutes tops. And I'm probably 4 minutes is probably giving them a lot of space because it was quicker than that.
Right.
So then the next series that I did is I done the same track 30 minutes old with the handler on the dog.
Right.
15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is, I will say, a lot of that is the handlers that are still learning and still reading their dogs and getting off track and having to bring the dog back on track. So a lot of that goes in there. But I've done that exercise just to show them that, hey, the dog knows what he's doing.
Right.
It's you that I'm trying to teach. And if this dog can find this person an hour-old track, a half a mile in less than 5 minutes, like it shouldn't take you 15 minutes to do it.
Right.
So, but I will say that when we run them off lead, the dogs were not gassed like they were on lead.
Right.
They were not.
Well, yeah, they don't have that anchor.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Like I said, I don't have an exact answer, but I see the same results, even though we're doing the same task in a different style. We're getting the same results.
Right. And that's, you talk about that perimeter, and there's another road ahead that you can send another agent up ahead to cut for the sign. You can say, hey, I'm on, a waffle track, sign a 4, or if they're all on carpet or whatever, you can send them ahead to cut ahead and try to get ahead of it and, and pin it in between. We've done that, before, where we've been able to pin them in between, and then they'll usually lay up. And like the style of tracking where if you're holding the dog back, you can just walk right into where they're laid up at, no problem. But if you don't have that element, like, you're calling a perimeter, if you don't have that, I don't know that you'd catch up to these ones, as you're just pushing them. Because there's times that even on foot without a dog, you can see them in front of you and they can see you and they just don't stop and you don't stop. And you just keep pushing until somebody can finally get out in front of them and lay them up or get them put down, because you're not gaining any distance and they're not gaining any distance. And it's like the constantly moving pendulum, you can't catch up to it, to grab a hold of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. And you got to make up time. I get it. Like, you got to make up time.
Yeah, and you don't want to leave the track. I mean, if you visually see them, it's all right, but you get into the thick stuff, and if you left the track trying to catch up to them, then you got to reacquire the track and start pushing the track through the thick stuff until you can see them again, or the tracking conditions are better or whatever. So when you're coming in behind, you're always behind.
Yes. No, that's and like I said, we I don't say we live and die by the perimeter, but it's a big part of our success. I'll say that.
It's definitely a force multiplier for sure.
Yeah. You make them lay down, they can get caught. They get caught, right, don't they?
Yeah. We do the same thing with helicopter, a lot of times is if we can't get into them and they're pushing hard, they'll bring a helicopter in and lay them down, or they'll bring the drone in and they'll fly the drone really low and they'll hear the drone. So then they'll brush up. And the helicopter's kind of funny working with it, under night vision, is the helicopter will put the midnight sun on a clump of bushes, but the bodies are never in that clump of bushes, but the bodies don't move because they think the helicopter can kind of see them. So they stay there, and the helicopter will put their laser pointer on the bush that actually has the bodies. And then we just walk straight in with our NVGs and grab the bodies that are underneath the laser pointer, not under the midnight sun.
Oh, makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes good sense. Yeah, that's a pretty good idea. So
That
any that's right. Any other dog related questions or thoughts?
No, that's just what I want to bounce off you. Just some of those differences between the two, and I didn't figure there was like a this is why this is the answer to your question. It's just nice to hear other perspectives on it and get some feedback on it because I figured it had to do with maybe the conditioning and the way that the dogs are run and handled. Something different with the police dogs and our hounds is most of us, even though we might hunt multiple game, the hounds are kind of single purpose, for just
Mhm.
the aspect of everything they're doing is tracking, trailing, and chasing, so it's not like that dog's out there and has to learn how to track and then has to go learn how to detect roads in a car and then learn how to search, a building, and things like that. So they don't have all those different tools in their belt. They kind of have that one tool. They got their nose and they track and trail animals for us. So it's I've always thought maybe that has a little bit to play into it as well, because it's kind of a single driven factor versus a multi driven factor.
Yeah, and do you think have you seen if you've got a dog that's single purpose tracking and he's out there day in and day out and day in and day out, does that range not change?
So the range changes, and they're definitely in better shape than dogs that come from out of the area, but they don't, like we had one, it's been several years ago, and it was over in a different area where we're a lot further away from the border. That dog pushed that track for about 8 miles, and
Mm,
then that was it. And then we pushed it on foot from there on. And another canine handler cut another road ahead of us, had the sign, and he started pushing the sign from there and moved on. And then that canine handler, he turned around and got the closest road to his dog picked up, because the dog was gassed. It's springtime. It's not like it's super hot. It's 75 out. It's pretty dry.
mhm. Yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, we're getting the same results on the back end, um, of it, and like I said, I can run my dogs off lead, and I see the benefits of it.
Hmm.
Like it has to, and you and I talked about this too. I know we talked about the vests and the harnesses.
Yeah.
We know that restricts them in their breathing, but you said y'all were running a very small harness
Yep.
on
Yep.
yours, and I do know that some of my guys are running the whole vests that go
Right.
down
The
cover their
ballistic.
flanks and everything.
Mhm.
I'm not in the wintertime. I'd probably be all right with it, but I want to be as least constrictive to my dog as I can be.
Yeah, for sure.
Uh, so
You know,
I run.
maybe one of the other things, like, like you were talking about why the condition doesn't change is maybe it's because they get a bunch of those short ones, that 1 mile, that 2 mile track, and they don't get those long 8 mile tracks. So they don't actually get the chance, just like we talked about, sprinters and marathon runners, they don't get the chance to get conditioned for that longer track on a regular basis. That's not
Mhm.
something they're doing every single day. They're going out and tracking every day, but it's the shorter races. It's kind of like the difference between at least in my world, the endurance of a bear dog versus a lion dog. The lion dog doesn't have to have as big of lungs. It doesn't have to be in as good a shape because they're slow trailing mostly or fast trailing. And the race is a sprint because lions have small lungs. Where a bear race, you might be running that bear for 30 miles at a lope, where they're trotting along the whole time. And so they're just that they get conditioned better than a lion dog. And that might be a more accurate comparison, but just that longer track, they don't get conditioned to that because they're not doing that longer track all the time. They're doing the shorter tracks most of the time.
Yeah, and that brings up two good points. Like I do notice, and I don't want to offend anybody. I'm sorry, but I do notice that a lot of the line dogs are heavier boned, heavier built dogs, and they
Mhm.
may not be like huge dogs, but they're not they're not um, they're not put up the same as my dogs. And I'm using
Mhm.
mine as a reference, not
Yeah.
everybody else's. Like if you go on and start looking at other dogs, like you guys out west, I would look at that dog and be like, they ain't catching no bear here, in my
Yeah.
mind.
Right.
So the structure and makeup of the dog is different there. Um, and I don't know what my second point was now, but yeah, we're running. I mean, I'm running 8-10 miles a day, and it's up and down and up
Yeah.
and down. And
Hmm.
it's like it would be like training a quarter horse to run the barrels and a thoroughbred to run the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah. Yep.
So you condition yourself to what you're doing. So I mean, I think all of those factors play into it. Honestly,
Yeah. I would agree.
I think we probably got it narrowed down. It's just it may be the whole gamut. It may be all
Yeah.
of those things that are affecting them.
There's too many factors to say one.
Yes, yes, for sure. So, well, Travis, I appreciate the question and the conversation, because I always think about that. I always think about I compare our police dogs to the hounds, not just mine, but hounds in general a lot. And I feel like, and I think I said at the beginning of this, we don't get the full capacity of our police dogs that we get out of our hounds. If we could take that lead off of them and just say, go get them, like
Yeah.
we'd probably be a whole lot more successful. Like we
Well,
would. I know we
yeah.
would.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you spending the evening with me, and I appreciate the question.
Hey, thanks, Heath. I appreciate it.
All right, Travis, thank you for helping us teach, train, and learn.